The WNBA's brightest star walked into practice on a Tuesday morning, and by Wednesday, she didn't exist. No injury report, no press release, no explanation. Caitlin Clark, the rookie who had filled arenas, shattered ratings, and pulled an entire generation into women's basketball, was erased from the rotation like she'd never stepped on the court. Her name vanished from the lineup board, coaches deflected questions with vague non-answers, and the league stayed completely silent, hoping everyone would just move on. They were catastrophically wrong, because two players refused to let this disappear quietly. Sophie Cunningham fired the first shot, saying what everyone was thinking, but nobody dared to say out loud. You don't sideline your biggest star unless you're scared of her power. Then Lexie Hull stepped forward with a question that cut even deeper. If this can happen to Caitlin Clark, what will they do to the rest of us? Those weren't just statements. They were declarations of war against a system that believed it could silence anyone who became too influential, too outspoken, too powerful to control. What you're about to hear isn't speculation, it's pattern recognition. Many of you have been connecting these dots for weeks, watching the WNBA's carefully constructed narrative crack wide open. This is the story they desperately tried to bury. The attempted erasure of the league's most dangerous asset, and the players who refuse to let institutional power win without a fight. If you believe the story behind the story matters, hit that like button right now. It tells us you're ready to filter out the noise and focus on what's actually happening when the cameras turn off and the press releases stop. Let's start with what we know for certain. Caitlin Clark wasn't just performing well. She was redefining what success looked like in women's basketball, leading her team in points, assists, and impact metrics that actually moved the needle, pulling more media attention than the rest of the league combined, selling out arenas everywhere she played, creating a cultural moment that transcended sports. She wasn't just a player, she had become a movement, a voice, a brand with opinions about how women's basketball should look, sound, and feel to real fans. And that's exactly where the problems started. Reporters first noticed something was off during a routine practice session. Clark wasn't warming up with the starters. Her name was missing from the rotation board entirely. That alone sent shockwaves through everyone watching. When journalists asked questions, coaches brushed them off with empty corporate speak that only made the situation more suspicious. Load management was floated as an excuse. Some insiders whispered about discipline issues. Others threw out half-baked theories that collapsed the moment you examined basic facts. Because here's what didn't add up. Clark hadn't broken any rules. She hadn't skipped practice. She hadn't violated team policy. Her performance numbers told a completely different story than whatever narrative the league was trying to construct. So why would any organization voluntarily remove the one player driving historic growth? Why would they bench the athlete pulling unprecedented attention to a league that desperately needed every bit of visibility it could get? The official answer was silence. Complete, calculated, institutional silence. But silence creates vacuums, and vacuums get filled. Sources close to the league began quietly talking. Whispers started spreading about tension between Clark and high-ranking officials. Her blunt post-game interviews reportedly rubbed people in power the wrong way. Her massive social media reach became something executives couldn't manage or filter. She wasn't just executing plays anymore. She was building influence that existed completely outside the league's control structure. And according to one particularly explosive leak, Clark had challenged league marketing decisions behind closed doors. She reportedly called their strategies tone-deaf and out of touch with the fans actually showing up to games and watching broadcasts. She wasn't asking for permission to have opinions. She was demanding the league listen to someone who understood the audience better than executives stuck in boardrooms making decisions based on outdated playbooks. Reading between the lines reveals what happened next. Less than 48 hours after that confrontation, Clark's minutes dropped significantly. Within 72 hours, she was glued to the bench, and then she vanished completely. No press conference explaining the decision, no media access to ask direct questions, no team statement addressing the obvious concerns, just cold, calculated silence designed to choke her momentum before it turned into something the league couldn't contain. They thought this would blow over. They genuinely believed fans would forget. Media would move on, and control would be restored without consequence. They fundamentally misread the moment they were creating, because fans didn't just notice, they organized. Hashtags exploded across every platform. "Where is Caitlyn" became a rallying cry that spread faster than any official PR campaign could counter. Thousands flooded comment sections demanding answers. Digital protests turned every league announcement into an interrogation. Even NBA players started speaking up, calling the situation disrespectful to the game itself. And every hour of continued silence from league officials made the cover-up more obvious. This wasn't just about benching a player anymore. This was about institutional power trying to silence influence it couldn't control. And watching it happen in real time pushed Sophie Cunningham past the point where staying quiet felt acceptable. Sophie didn't wait for permission. She didn't file requests through proper channels or ask PR teams for approval. While reporters chased rumors and fans flooded social media with outrage, she walked straight to the post-game microphone, skipped every scripted talking point, and dropped a sentence that detonated across the internet within minutes. "You do not sideline your biggest star unless you are scared of her power." That one line changed everything. Clips went viral before the league could spin the narrative. Sports media suddenly had no choice but to address what they'd been tiptoeing around. Commentators who had carefully avoided controversy were forced to ask the hard questions everyone was already thinking. And Sophie wasn't finished talking. On her podcast, she went even deeper, laying out what she believed was really happening inside team meetings and front office decisions. She challenged leadership directly, live on air, saying the quiet part out loud when most athletes were still biting their tongues. Sophie made it crystal clear. Caitlin Clark wasn't benched for basketball reasons. She was sidelined because her influence scared people who prefer stars they can manage instead of voices they can't control. Sophie accused the league of playing political games with player careers. She blasted executives for choosing control over actual progress. She called out a culture that punishes excellence the moment it comes with independent opinions. And everyone watching understood the risks she was taking by speaking this honestly. Endorsements could vanish overnight. Playing time could mysteriously shrink. Doors that once opened easily could quietly close. The whisper networks that decide who gets opportunities and who gets iced out could turn on her instantly. Sophie knew all that. She calculated the personal cost and decided the truth mattered more than her own protection. And before we go further, drop a comment right now. Tell us what you think really happened behind those closed doors, because connecting these dots requires all of us paying attention to patterns the league hopes we'll ignore. Your perspective matters. Share it. Fans reacted to Sophie's courage immediately. Hashtags didn't just trend, they multiplied. Stand with Sophie and Free Clark surged side by side across every platform. What started as frustration transformed into a coordinated movement almost overnight. Sophie's willingness to speak lit a fuse the league never saw coming, and the flames started spreading faster than anyone could control. But Sophie wasn't standing alone for long. The very next day, another player stepped forward, ready to amplify the message even louder. Lexie Hull didn't ease into it with carefully polished statements or corporate-approved talking points. She walked straight into the press room after practice, stood in front of cameras, and delivered raw truth aimed directly at what every player in the league had been thinking privately. If Caitlin Clark can be treated like this, what do you think they will do to the rest of us? No spin, no diplomatic language, just a question that exposed the real power dynamic everyone had been too afraid to acknowledge out loud. Lexie wasn't just defending a teammate. She was calling out a system where no player, regardless of talent or impact, was actually safe from institutional retaliation. Her words hit like a shockwave, because she wasn't speculating about abstract possibilities. She was pointing at concrete evidence happening in real time. If the league could make their biggest star disappear without explanation, then every other player existed at the mercy of decisions made behind closed doors by people who valued compliance over excellence. Lexie went further. She talked about the unspoken rules players navigate daily, the pressure to stay quiet when you witness unfairness, the understanding that speaking honestly about league politics could derail your entire career, the fear that keeps talented athletes from challenging power even when they know something's deeply wrong. And by saying it publicly, Lexie gave permission to everyone else who had been silencing themselves out of survival instinct. The message was clear. The era of accepting these conditions without pushback was ending. Players were done pretending the emperor had clothes when everyone could see he was standing there naked. The league's response was more silence, but this time, silence wasn't an option that would protect them. This time, every hour without official answers felt like confirmation that Sophie and Lexie were exposing something leadership desperately wanted hidden. The attempted cover-up was becoming more damaging than the original controversy. Social media erupted. The conversation shifted from speculation about one benching to fundamental questions about how the entire league operated. Fans started digging through past incidents, finding patterns of players who mysteriously lost opportunities after speaking honestly. Former athletes who had left the league years ago began sharing their own experiences of being silenced, overlooked, punished for refusing to play roles assigned to them by executives who saw talent as something to control rather than celebrate. Each story added weight to what Sophie and Lexie had already exposed. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was standard operating procedure. The only difference now was that someone finally said it publicly with enough platform and credibility that the league couldn't simply dismiss or discredit them. Behind closed doors, tensions were escalating fast. According to sources close to multiple teams, locker rooms began splitting along fault lines that had nothing to do with basketball. Veterans who had survived league politics by keeping their heads down suddenly found themselves clashing with younger players who refused to accept the old rules. Trust crumbled as everyone tried to figure out who supported the status quo and who was ready to demand fundamental change. Reports surfaced that players from several teams were communicating privately, coordinating conversations away from official channels, building a coalition of athletes who felt failed by leadership. This wasn't just two outspoken players anymore. The league was facing the reality that its entire workforce might stop tolerating conditions they'd accepted for far too long out of fear. And then came the moment that changed everything permanently. Sophie Cunningham and Lexie Hull returned together, not with tweets, not with cryptic social media posts, with a joint interview broadcast live across major sports networks, breaking every unwritten rule about how players were supposed to handle controversy. No prepared statements, no careful phrasing designed to protect relationships. They sat side by side, stared straight into cameras, and delivered a warning that couldn't be softened or spun. The era of silence is over. Sophie spoke first, her voice calm, but her words hitting like a hammer. If this is how you treat the player who built your league, no one is safe. The room went completely still. Reporters froze mid-note. Nobody rushed to fill the silence because the message landed too heavy to ignore. Lexie followed immediately, never breaking eye contact with the camera. "We've been told to stay quiet for too long. Not anymore." That was it. A clear line drawn in sand. The declaration rippled through every locker room in the league. Players watching from home knew exactly what they were witnessing. Two athletes with everything to lose, deciding that truth mattered more than comfort, solidarity over safety, accountability over silence. Clips from that interview moved faster than anything either player had ever said before. Within hours, millions of views across every platform. Commentators called it the most honest moment in WNBA history. NBA players jumped in, retweeting with clear support that amplified the message even further. Even rival WNBA stars who had stayed quiet before started publicly backing them. What began as one controversy suddenly felt like a collective awakening. Fans didn't just react. They organized, coordinated campaigns targeting sponsors directly, urging them to publicly choose sides. Independent media outlets built by former athletes began publishing deep investigations into league politics, quiet punishments, careers that mysteriously stalled for reasons never explained in official records. Everything the league hoped would stay buried was being dragged into public view, whether leadership wanted it there or not. Sophie and Lexie had become something far more dangerous to the old power structure than outspoken teammates. They were symbols of resistance, living proof that players could challenge institutional authority and survive the fallout. Their willingness to take the first hit publicly gave others permission to speak. The coalition forming behind closed doors suddenly had leaders willing to stand in the spotlight. Before you go, make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on, because this story is far from over. Tomorrow, we're breaking down the league's internal response and why several executives are reportedly facing pressure to resign. The players started this conversation. Now let's see if leadership has the courage to actually listen, or if they'll double down on the same silence that created this crisis in the first place. I'll see you in the next one.